And Michael, we are live 1 minute away from starting.
Excellent. Well, very good to be here and talking with you.
So if you're joining, gradually we'll start right on the hour. But if you're starting to come in, please tell us in the chat where you're joining from. If you feel like it, that would be really nice because otherwise, Michael and I cannot see you. So if you say hello, that will be wonderful. If you have any questions that you'd like me to ask Michael, type it there. We would love to hear this. And while we're waiting, Michael, what else could we talk about than weather? Wolfville, Nova Scotia, which is for everyone about 100 kilometers from Halifax.
Yes, it is a small town. It is about 4,000 people. It doesn't rate a stop sign, a stoplight. It's just a little town with a university in it, with Acadia University in it, on the Bay of Fundy. So we have
Sounds
serious tides. So that's our claim to fame. It's tides and mud. Yeah.
Oh, and so weather today, are we on the colder side or what are we?
Oh, well, it's sort of in between. It's raining, but it's like raining and about +2 or 3 or something like that. It'll sometime tonight it'll sort of turn into snow for a bit and then clear up. So it's just a rainy, just cold, wet, and spring.
Yeah. Well, it's Vancouver has been like this in the recent days, actually, more than usual. But it is sunny right now, just for the
Oh,
record.
okay.
For all of you people thinking Vancouver always rains, not right now.
Uh,
Okay, Michael, we are on the hour. Everyone, we're going to get started. We're recording anyway, so if you're catching this as a recording, that's equally fabulous to have you with us. And so, welcome, everyone. I am Marie-Helene Pelletier, and in this conversation, we're addressing how we can redefine resilience. And specifically today, we're going to talk about burnout with Dr. Michael Leiter. Michael.
hello, very good to be
Hello.
here. Talk about burnout. Yeah.
Amazing to have you here. Everyone, I'm going to, I've already invited you. Please remember, say hello in the chat so we see where you are. And if you have any questions, let us know. I'm going to read the formal bio for Michael. I've known Michael for a long time. But for right now, for all of you, here it is. Dr. Leiter is an emeritus professor of psychology at Acadia University in Canada. He is a registered psychologist. He is an internationally renowned psychologist for his work on job burnout and work engagement. Dr. Leiter is in demand as a keynote speaker and consultant on organizational research throughout North America and Europe. Also does work in Australia. Yes?
That's true.
That's true. And probably everywhere around the world. Thank you. We have Anne-Sophie joining from Ottawa Gatineau region. Hi, Anne-Sophie. And everyone, if you want to say hi, please do. That's always amazing. I want to share with you, just before we dive in, how I personally met Michael. He did not meet me that day. I got to know him. I was at a conference many years ago in my career. And, professional conferences, academic people talking about academic things, which you love because it's always fascinating and everything. Many of these individuals are very brainy in the way they talk. For someone very applied like me, often I need to translate what they say, so it's going to make sense to the people I end up working with here. And then I heard Dr. Michael Leiter. No one's like this. You have in this one individual all the brainy aspect, all the research, the rigor, all of this, obviously. But then he gets it. He understands that reality there. And that makes this fabulous individual researcher person so amazing for me to have here today. Michael's also an endorser of my book. And everyone, I cannot tell you how much of an honor it is. So, Michael, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for making time to be with us.
Oh, very good to be here. And again, I've really appreciated your book and your contribution to all of this because there are a lot of issues that people need to get on top of with their careers. And I think you're contributing an element to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's dive into our topic. And of course, we'll start with your definition of burnout because we're going to dive quickly into other aspects. But people use burnout for being exhausted. People use burnout to being done with their work. They use it for all kinds of things. Which definition do you work with?
Right. The one I work with is really, it's the one that's been endorsed by the World Health Organization and its current sort of compendium of how it organizes these things, which is burnout as a syndrome of a three-part syndrome of ongoing exhaustion combined with sort of a cynicism, distancing from work, plus discouragement, losing confidence in your ability to do things. So it's this really sort of negative kind of space. And I think uh, in its full-blown form, it's a really insidious and self-perpetuating kind of experience that keeps people in a a really unpleasant kind of spot for a long time. So I look at it as that combination of things. I know people use the word to mean a whole lot of stuff, just sort of a reaction to a frustrating day. But I think that in terms of what we look at in terms of measurement, it is those three aspects coming together.
Yes, yes. So, and you have worked in this area. I have as well. Often, it brings together a combination of components in the workplace, right? The individual, the team, the organization itself. Share with us what's your perspective on all these components of this system, if I can call it that, and how they interact together at times to generate situations where people are more at risk of burning out.
Yeah. Well, basically, when you do surveys and you have a lot of measures in your survey, which some of these surveys do, you find that everything correlates with burnout. Like everything is related to that. It's this very central kind of experience through which people connect with the world or disconnect with the world or interpret the world. And so you look at it, what we've come around to looking at this over the years is that burnout is best thought about as sort of a relationship crisis between people in their workplaces. That the issue isn't that people are giving out or that workplaces are necessarily impossible. A few might be, but most of them are, they have their problems, but they are somewhat manageable by some of the people, at least some of the time. But what is particularly important in burnout is that there is this mismatch between what people are aspiring to, expecting, hoping for through their career, and what they're experiencing when they're interacting with the workplace that they're connected with. And that disconnect, which can have to do with the amount of work and when to do it, but a lot more to do with what kind of work or how to do it or who you're doing the work with than really the amount of work. I think the workload gets more press than it deserves as a driver of this. It's part of it, certainly part of it, but it's not the whole story. So I think it's that disconnect between people and what they're thinking work should be all about is what really is the aggravating part for burnout.
So expectations at times, which would you say at times are just realistic, just unmet, or at times unrealistic?
Well, you get both parts, and that's where I think
Mm.
it is good looking at it as a relation because people can be unreasonable, but also workplaces can be unreasonable, bosses can be
Yeah.
unreasonable. Unreasonable can and reasonable often is a matter of one's point of view on the particular situation. But I look at sort of what the fundamental thing that I really get focused on is that there are these core psychological motives of belonging, of efficacy, of autonomy that drive a lot of what people are about, and particularly get into a setting, an environment like a workplace, and you're trying to sort out these things. And people, they want to belong to a group that values them, that cherishes them, that thinks they're a valuable member of the group. And when those fundamental kinds of motivations get frustrated, that goes really deeply into people. They experience that deeply. And then you're going to get that kind of enduring stress that that gets very difficult to manage for folks because that's such a fundamental thing that's being frustrated for them.
Yes. Yes. And of course, as you were describing the main characteristics of burnout, that's the characteristics of what this is as a syndrome, as an occupational phenomenon. And then as it goes, right? Like you say, as you're experiencing these frustrated parts of the experience, it can lead to depression, anxiety, and other things on the physical health side. So it's
Mhm.
in some ways, sometimes people will say, well, it's highly unpleasant and I can tough it out. Like I'll put my head down and keep going. But have you seen that you can't actually do this because at some point it will get to you, want it or not?
Yeah, that's what, again, that occupational phenomenon is the term that, that's used for burnout. And it's what that means, it's somewhat parallel to chronic unemployment, which itself isn't a disease, but can lead to all kinds of psychological and physical
Yeah.
difficulties down the road, as can burnout. So people go, oh, well, there's often people who are highly burned out are also vulnerable to depression, but those are like two different steps of the process, two
Yeah.
different kinds of experiences that are, there's a relationship between the two, but they are somewhat distinct. So
Yeah.
it's that kind of vulnerability. And the the thing that really becomes insidious about it is that workplaces are largely consistent from one day to the next, 1 year to the next. Like they're consistent over time. So you've got this sort of stable, this consistent environment that's it keeps impacting, and people are pretty much who they are from one day to the next, and 1 week to the next, and 1 year to the next. So it becomes this thing that becomes locked in time, and people consistently stay with that kind of experience.
Yes. Yes. So you've written, everyone, Jody's joining us. Hi, Jody, um, from Victoria. Um, You've written, and everyone, Michael's book, The Burnout Challenge, which is written with Christina Maslach, is his most recent. He's written many others before, but and that's one to consider if you're interested in burnout. It's amazingly well bringing, of course, research-based information, and again, in an applied way. So you can actually make changes. So highly recommend this. Michael, having been doing the work that you've been doing for years, what would you say are now the trends you're seeing around the world on burnout? We know we're not over this yet.
Yeah.
It's was a problem. It's still even more perhaps a problem. Tell us about what you're seeing.
Well, what I'm seeing is that people are definitely concerned about burnout and talking about it a lot more than they have. I mean, I started working on this issue with Christina Maslach back in the 1980s. So it was a long time ago. And you sort of see the interest wax and wanes over time. And it's very much there. Now, people are very concerned about, well, what is the prevalence of it? And is it growing?
Yeah.
And that's the impression I have is, yes, it's becoming more and more of an issue for people, just the fact that they're talking about it a lot more
Mm.
and talking to me about it a lot more anyway. But that it's very difficult to know anything about its real prevalence. I look at sort of surveys that are trying to do that, and they are a bit too, they don't really get to the heart of the matter. The one problem is that uh, even researchers use very different kinds of measures to measure what is burnout, what they call burnout. And they'll use the same measure, but they'll score it in very different kinds of ways. So if you go from one study to the next, like this one review, I said, well, there were like 100 different ways of defining burnout across these various studies. And the incidence of it went from 0% up to 89%. And you're going, that's not very useful. So in terms of the data, there isn't really the hard data of grand national surveys using consistent measures over years that answer that question succinctly. What you have is a general feeling. People are talking about this a lot. And it makes sense because it goes to this idea of how demanding work is on people. People are feeling
Mm.
that work is getting more and more intrusive in terms of its demands. I think that's a big piece of it. And people have a lot of aspirations about what they want from their work life and are finding that it's not being fulfilled. And it could be that people are expecting more than they used to and are being frustrated by that. But that would make sense because actually people really deserve more from a lot of their work life than they've been getting over the years. And so it makes sense that they would want to up the game there a bit and are frustrated when the workplaces aren't beating them with that.
Great point. And on that one, because that's something that I'm pretty sure our audience is thinking about as you're saying this, it feels like we're all wanting more, different, better, healthier. And we're hearing also at times, even the more specifically, the newer generations coming to the workforce asking for this or expecting this perhaps even more. Are you seeing this? Is that something workplaces are pushed to consider even more because of these newer generations coming? Or actually, sure, yes, and everyone wants this as well. What's your view of this?
Well, yeah, I think that, well, the standards keep rising, and I think that people are expecting more, and that it makes perfect sense. I mean, workplaces used to be, really unwelcoming environments for a lot of the people in those, and very, not particularly accommodating to different points of view or different ways of being or anything
Yeah.
like that. And so there is certainly an insistence that there's got to be a lot more recognition of the variety of people who make up a workforce and meeting people where they reside in that kind of way. So I think that's a particularly important part of it. And just yeah, these are the kinds of changes that workforces need to, leadership needs to rise to, and if they're going to meet the like one thing was an example was when the pandemic closures started happening, people found from one day to the next that something that was impossible last week, which was I would like to work at home a lot of the time, became mandatory the following week because you had to work at home all the time. And you go, wait a minute, I thought that was impossible. It's something you couldn't survive. But actually, things rolled along okay after that kind of change. And now that, the lockdowns are over, you see there's a lot of tension around who's going to work with that idea that being able to work, being mobile in terms of your location or the time that you're working is something that people value. That's a valuable thing. And people want that. And people will leave one job to find another. That gives them more latitude in that regard. But that kind of flexibility just on that issue it's a point of tension with a lot of workplaces. It's something that's being resolved. It's something that requires learning and coming up with a different way of running things, a different way of understanding productivity. But that's something that leadership managers at workplaces, they need to get on top of that. It's not something to say, let's pretend like that never happened. We didn't actually require people to, no, that's what happened. And that is the kind of reality now that needs to be accommodated.
And staying with this, have you seen, and if you've not seen this, that's completely okay as well, because you and I always love the applied side of things. So what do we do with this?
Mhm.
What have you seen those organizations or even teams, leaders of teams perhaps, um, those that have been navigating this with their eyes open, with a recognition of, yeah, this did happen. What's one example of something they do or their approach that makes this overall process more successful, less risky for burnout, amongst other things?
Okay. Well, just on that issue of where to work, that mobility and workplace, I think part of it is one having a collaborative approach to it, saying this is
Mhm.
something we need to work out as a team. Like our work group needs to figure out how this is going to be, and how much we need to be together to do what, and how we're going to look at not something that's decreed from the boss because that's the way it needs to be because I said so, but something where and not just one individual at a time, but the group. One person coming or being there or not being there it's defining the environment of other people. So
Mm.
others have a stake in that. It's not just all about, each individual. It's about the shared as well. But then one needs to think through, well, if we are saying we've got to commute, we got to come in and be in this space together, why? What's the point of that? What are we? And then you get much more focused on making sure that happens. Particularly, you can't just wait for it to just sort of, maybe it's going to happen someday because we're together all the time. You got to go, no, okay, um, we've got to, we've got to, figure out what we're about with this and how to make it happen. Yeah.
Love it. These aspects of, yes, being collaborative and what specifically are we after? It reminds me of the same kinds of things we'll want to pay attention to as AI gets into our workplaces even more. That
Yeah.
we're having this collaborative, very open conversation where there is enough psychological trust and safety so that we can actually talk about the concerns and ways in which to optimize. Connects with this. What, Michael, were you going to add something, None?
Oh, no, I think in terms of leadership, in terms of managers, like the core pieces are to, one, listen to people so that you can figure out what is going on among the group, but also flexibility becomes a very important piece of that. Do you have room to maneuver as a manager? And if you don't, well, how are you going to get it? And then if you do have it, how are you going to use it? How do you make sure it's used fairly, used in a way that is responsive and moves the whole group forward?
And thank you. These are so good. And these are examples of things that you would find in Michael's book, his most recent, about directions and concrete actions, things to consider, examples of what others have done. So helpful in both bringing solid information in a way that's very applied. So if you want more of this, the book for sure. Going back, Michael, I want to run this by you because I've heard this now a few times. As organizations are looking to pay even more attention to burnout and uh, learn about the particular concerns of their groups or the level of concerns of their groups. As you know, workplaces are not university research centers. They are not equipped with the same resources. They have many other operational things they need to do, blah, blah. And so at times they will find themselves looking to assess the state of the nation in ways that are a bit challenging. For example, simply asking, are you, yes or no, feeling burnt out? And then they're highly likely to get a solid 87% yes, right? Which then people in this group may say, well, wait a second, I just listened to Dr. Michael Leiter. He said burnout includes three things. Many people use it as, I had a bad day today. What is going on here in our responses that may actually not be valid, right? But yet, it's an effort that the workplace is doing to at least connect and start this conversation. How do you help organizations and employees in this situation make sense of this kind of action, which is something so better than nothing potentially, or not, but certainly not of the caliber of reliability and validity of what we may get in some research programs?
Right. Well, I think basically my idea is that, in terms of employers being concerned about burnout, is that I caution them to be careful that, basically I would suggest you don't ask the question unless you're actually willing and able to respond to the answer. So I think most managers, if they're on top of their game, have some idea of what kind of answer they're going to get. They could be some surprises, but they got a general idea about what's going on here. And so given that you've got some idea of what's going on, are you ready to respond to that? And if so, what do you have in mind? So I think that when I'm working, I sometimes work with organizations, that are doing sort of big employee surveys. Some of them are doing, the really the more valid kinds of measures, working with Mind Garden to use the burnout scale, what our areas of work life, other kinds of measures that we have in place for that. But the idea is that before you even start doing the survey, you need to have your game plan worked out. Like, what are the likely kinds of responses we're going to get. What do we think are going to be the problem areas within our organization? Because you have something really big like a hospital or something. Some places are going to be doing great and other places are going to be having a hard time. How would you map that just on a guess? And what would you, and how fast can we respond? Like it's a conversation. You're asking people what's going on. And some of these surveys, like one we did with the hospital, remember lately, we also, in addition to the questionnaire data, we had, open-ended comments. And the open-ended comments, people wrote 100,000 words of open-ended comments of what they thought was going on here. So the place needs to be ready. What are you going to, that's a conversation. Now it's our turn to say something. And you've got to have your turn ready. You can't say, well, in 6 months or so after we analyze everything and think about it and have a few meetings, we'll come back with a response. No, you should have a response ready to go. It should be as short a time as possible before when you close the survey and when you've got something to say to people. So you've got to have an analysis built in that's pretty much automatic with the survey. And then you've got to be able to dig into it. You have to have the analytical capacity to dig into that, to make sense of it, to put together the words and the numbers and say, this is what our issue is. Here's how we're going to respond to that and respond to it with, and get everything you can out of that data. It's taken a lot of time and energy and effort to get that. It's expensive. A lot of data, a lot of good information gets left on the table by places that just don't know how to sort it out. So that it becomes, but again, the basic thing is don't ask the question unless you're planning to respond to that and to what they tell you.
Oh, so true. And like you say, you're otherwise leaving a lot of good information on the table. You're leaving the trust that you just tried to build by asking the question and getting all these words shared with you that will not be there for you when you ask again in the future if you've not been responsive in this conversation.
Trust is a very, very valuable thing. You should never squander it. You should cherish it,
Hmm.
build it.
Yes. Yes.
It's the road to getting anything significant done is trust.
Agreed. Michael, we're almost at the end of our time together. You've given us already so much to think about. Great information. Of all the things you could share with us, what would you say? So let's say we're here as listeners, some maybe in leadership roles, some maybe members of teams, some maybe in HR, listening in the future and all this. So understanding very broad range potentially. But if there was one next action that many of us could probably consider, knowing the context is different everywhere, what would be one example of something for us to think about and go with this?
Oh, well, I'm thinking a lot with leaders that the idea that flexibility is an extremely valuable thing. It's got flexibility, being able to accommodate different modes of work across the various people that report to you, being able to have a clear idea about what is it that this team needs to get done, and being able to focus on what do we do in order to maximize that capacity of this group. And you need flexibility. You got to work out different solutions for different people, different solutions for the team across time. And that getting the authority to be able to make those kinds of adjustments with people is probably one of the most powerful things you can have in order to realize the potential of a work group.
Oh, very true. What a great inspiration. So everyone, let's go on our path today, this week, next month, looking for even more ways in which we can bring flexibility to ourselves and people around us. Michael, Dr. Michael Leiter, it's been such a pleasure, an honor for me to have you. Thank you for having been with us.
It's been a delight being here. So I really enjoy talking with you every time, and then today especially.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us, for your notes in the chat, some of your questions we've been able to get to, and we'll see each other next time. Bye, everyone.